Good morning once again. Our subject today, justice and the marginalized. This is January 30th, 2022. I'm Vincent Walker, Superintendent of Emanuel AME Sunday School in Mobile, Alabama. Reverend John L. Dees Jr. is our pastor. Real quick lesson today. Subject, justice and the marginalized. Justice, we got a pretty good understanding of what justice is. Justice, we've been talking about it, fairness, compassion, doing right by people. The marginalized. Let's look at the definition of that word. The definition of marginalized is to keep someone powerless or unimportant in a position within society. To keep someone powerless or unimportant. Man, that's cold right there. That is cold. So justice and the marginalized, what we're talking about. We're in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 10 through 21. And it breaks it down. We have 5 points we're going to look at today. So the first point talks about borrowing and lending money. Borrowing and lending money at that time, God has given, these are instructions from God. Just so you know, these verses are instructions from God on how to treat people, how to be compassionate, how to just do things right. We seem to have lost that in our society today, just how to be a good person. Here's some things right here. God was telling his people in this one, borrowing and lending money. In borrowing or lending money, there were some stipulations. God said if you were to lend somebody some money, similar today when you lend somebody something, maybe you get a home loan or anything, most of the time they require a deposit down. Well, this deposit was something the borrower would give to the lender this time. If you were borrowing money or you're borrowing something, most of the times you didn't have much, but you still had to give a deposit to show some type of good faith. Well, there was one important stipulation in there. God said the lender could not go into the borrower's house during this transaction. Why might you add? Because you have to understand, lenders have the power, so they would say, and they can oftentimes make the borrower powerless. So if you're lending somebody something and you go in the house and you need a deposit, you may try to take their best thing out of their house. Well, God put a pin in that. He said you're not allowed to go in the house. The borrower determined what the deposit was. The lender could have easily taken advantage and taken something great out of the house. So God set rules there for borrowing and lending, how to take care, how to show compassion on them, and other stipulations what to do. All right, next we move on. God said to pay workers daily, pay them fairly, to treat people fairly. God said that you need to pay these workers fairly. One, the main reason was if you don't pay these people fairly, they may bring out against you. They may pray to me against you, and then you're found in guilt. Then basically God's saying, I got to deal with you then because you didn't treat them fairly. We're still talking about marginalizing people. All of this is talking about how people with so-called power need to treat people that they try to put in powerless situations. So pay people right. Pay people fairly. Pay people when you're supposed to pay them, and not just because you got some money to hold that over their head. Doesn't mean that if you treat them wrong, God will still deal with you. Moving on to our next point. Now this one here was it's talking about punishing families for crimes that are committed by just one person. You know, don't put the whole family to death because the father has committed a crime. Don't put the whole family to death because the mother or the child has committed a crime. That person is responsible for their crimes, and the punishment shall suit their crime. Don't go out and punish an entire family for something only one person in the family has done. Common practice before. This has been practice where somebody messes up, the whole family gets taken out. I won't say common practice, it was a practice. Sorry, let me correct myself. All right, next, this is a very important one here. It talks about treating slaves and orphans and foreigners in your country fairly. That's a key one there. Treating them fairly and not also treating them fairly, but in the case where they need justice on their side, they should receive justice when things are done against them. You treat them just as fair and just as right as the person with power or the person who is of that country. Also talks about orphans, treating them fairly and giving them the justice. The big part when it talks about the slaves and treating them fairly, remember God is talking to his people and he's saying, listen, remember, you were once slaves in Egypt. Remember the harshness that you went through. Don't put somebody else through that. So God is giving instructions on that as well. Finally, God set a plan in place so that the poor and the hungry would always have food, would always have something. He said, don't gather. Whatever you don't gather, you're not able to gather of your harvest. Don't try to overflow. Leave it there so that the poor and the less fortunate and those that are hungry, they can have something. Leave some for the poor. Leave some for them. Too often in our society, people say, I worked hard for mine. They can do the same. That's not what God says. That's not what God says. He said, leave some for them. Because you don't know what their predicament is. Because guess what? Guess what? You people that say you worked hard for yours and you'll never end up like that. Guess what? You just one natural disaster away, one fire, one bad decision away, and you can be homeless. You can have no money. Some may say, well, I got this set up. Guess what? The master accountant, the chief of all CPAs, the chief of all chiefs, of all executive officers, of all financial officers, of all operation officers, of all of any type of any chief resides in heaven. So guess what? You can be in that same position. So treat people fairly. Have compassion. Amen, my brothers and sisters. Have a blessed day.